You're listening to Risk and Resolve, where leadership, business, and risk management collide. We bring you real conversations, sharp insights, and strategies for success. And now for your hosts, Ben Conner and Todd Hufford.
Welcome back to another episode of Risk and Resolve. I'm Ben Conner alongside Todd Hufford, and today's special guest is Darren Thompson, founder and president at Process Alliance, also a fellow member of our C12 cohort here in Indianapolis. Darren, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it. Look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it as well. You and I have built a friendship over the last 4 years or so.
Yeah.
And it's been really cool to do that, to talk about life in general, but also just an incredible story of a Lilly engineer leader retiring into just something totally massive, which is Process Alliance. And we'll get into that story. But before we get going, Darren, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little bit of a background of you, where you grew up, and just, what did it look like? What made Darren?
Sure. Well, the thumbnail sketch is I was born and raised here in Franklin, Indiana. Live in my hometown that I grew up in. My brother lives in the house we grew up in. Born into a blue-collar family with roots going into Kentucky and to the tobacco region of Western Kentucky. And my dad was a UAW, a General Motors guy. My mom, dabbled here and there and took care of the kids and lived in the town she grew up in after they moved out of Kentucky. And so that's kind of where we came from. Just one brother, a solid blue collar, middle class growing up. When I grew up, I was on my bike every day of the week, riding through town, and no inhibitions back then in the 60s and 70s. So life was pretty good with just a small little family of the four of us here in Franklin, Indiana. Married my high school sweetheart. Bonnie and I started dating in 1978, and then we just celebrated our 44th anniversary a week ago. So she also was born and raised here in Franklin, and so we've had the privilege of raising our children near grandparents and near our families. So that's the thumbnail sketch. Got out of high school, went to engineering school in Terre Haute and Rose-Hulman, and graduated at the worst possible time in 1983 when the economy was really struggling and couldn't find a job, struggled, took about a year to get a decent job, and then bounced around for I think 6 years or so before I landed at Eli Lilly, and then worked at Lilly for 30 years before retiring. So,
what were some of those first jobs that you had before totally going all in?
My very first job, a guy came on campus, and this was after graduation, and he asked two questions. Did you graduate, and can you start on Monday? And it was at the Marble Hill nuclear facility that one of the power companies was building down on the Ohio River between Madison and Jeffersonville. And that was my first big boy job right out of college. Worked the second shift, and it lasted for 3 months before they laid everybody off on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving in 1983, and then I was back at it. And then I think after that, I went to work for the Board of Health and the environmental side, and worked on some environmental work, and eventually made my way to Eli Lilly after a couple other assignments after I left the Board of Health.
So when you landed at Eli Lilly, what was like what were you first getting involved in, and how did that give us what did that career trajectory look like at Lilly?
Sure. Well, I studied chemical engineering, and so obviously for those of you who don't know, in the pharmaceutical world, at least in the upfront part of the manufacturing of making a drug molecule is a chemical or biological type of process, and the demand and need for chemical engineers in those facilities is pretty high, and so that's where I started off. I worked as an individual contributor engineer for I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years, and then went into leadership, into manufacturing leadership in one capacity or another. Pretty much stayed rooted in the engineering component, and then at the tail end of my career began to do large project capital project management. Unlike the scale of what Eli Lilly is doing today, but I was in the group that is now managing the massive expansion that you see going up in Lebanon, and certainly many other cities throughout the United States. But I was in that group that is now doing that. So it was kind of a migration from being in manufacturing and understanding the engineering function associated with manufacturing, and then migrating into large capital project delivery.
So you were working to, hey, where are we going next? What are we going to invest in from a build and startup, always into the where are we growing toward kind of mentality?
So there's always always a problem to be solved, always an expansion to be made, whether it was solving a risk problem from a compliance or a health and safety problem to adding capacity to make more molecules. And so companies like that have to have a lot of engineers and scientists to run the manufacturing component, and knowing how to design and build those facilities and how to start those up. And that's the space that I operated in.
All right.
So Darren, I was just checking this. I thought the date was pretty close, but Prozac approved for FDA approval December of 87, hit the U.S. market in 88. I bet you caught that wave, didn't you?
Yeah, there were two big waves back then. There was the Prozac wave, and I started in 1989, and then there was a pretty heavy wave in the antibiotic business. So, folks will remember a molecule by the name of C-chlor, and then a subsequent molecule whose name I can't remember. But those were the two big waves. So Lilly had got into the the mental health space with Prozac, and that was a molecule that did very well in the marketplace and provided a lot of fuel for the growth. I personally was in the insulin business for the majority of my career and worked in an insulin manufacturing facility, which is really part of our DNA here in Process Alliance, of being attached to a company that does good for people, in terms of you can walk into a football arena, basketball arena, and realize that there's a lot of diabetics sitting in this room, and knowing that I contribute in a really small way to their well-being. And so that's kind of at the heart of Process Alliance, is knowing that we contribute to the well-being of patients around the world in an extremely small way. But as an engineer in the pharmaceutical business, that gave me a lot of I'll call it the good part of pride, in knowing that I contributed to others' well-being.
Was most of your time in all those plants that are on the south side of Indianapolis, or were you elsewhere?
No, I was pretty much at the south side of Indianapolis. For a short amount of time, I was at the corporate center, but most of the time it's been in there on the south side of Indianapolis.
I think most people can't quite fathom the amount of square footage they have of manufacturing just right there, can they?
It's a lot. I've long since forgotten how big the footprint is, but it's a lot of acres, and I really don't have any understanding of how big the other facilities are from a scale, but they're, the one at Lebanon, as an example, is bigger than the Lilly Technology Center, at least I think, just from a scale perspective. I have no idea, since I haven't been involved in that, how big it is, but it's massively large. So
yeah, it looks like a city.
Yeah,
up there.
Yeah.
So so from that experience, and you mentioned Process Alliance, can you describe you, from what I understand, took a retirement package from Lilly, and then started your own company.
Yep.
You could just share
Sure.
what that was like. Maybe even share some of the biggest business principles or biggest lessons learned from your Lilly days that helped you in starting your own business too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, like you said, Ben, they did offer a retirement package at the end of 2017, and I was old enough and had enough years of experience to get a full retirement package out of there. So it was an opportunity to take that. I still had 2 boys in college. We have 4 children, and the 2 boys were still in college, so I had to go to work. And but it was an opportunity with the package that they delivered that I could explore some things. And so when that happened, of course, there were many other colleagues, in their late 50s and early 60s that retired, and there was this immense amount of talent that I had worked with a bunch of engineers and scientists. And when I told my wife, hey, there's an opportunity to retire, and she said, whatever you do, you just got to replace your Lilly income. Okay, I'll go figure that out. And so so I started talking to my colleagues that I retired with and say, hey, this is what I'd like to do. I saw a niche in an opportunity from some of the challenges that I faced, as a buyer of services at Lilly, and that there was just a lack of understanding of chemical engineering, and lack of understanding from other firms that just didn't really understand manufacturing. So we set out really to be a chemical engineering firm and partner with folks that didn't do chemical engineering. That kind of worked, didn't work all that well, and so we grew and pivoted and changed, but we really started on the backs of a bunch of squiggle 60-year-olds, and that worked, and we got some good traction, but you can't build a sustainable business on the backs of 60-year-olds. Your one question in terms of one of the main things that we learned, I think what I really took away with is the leadership and governance structure, and really Lilly did a really good job of leadership development, and had a really good structure for how they managed manufacturing. And so we took those principles as we grew and evolved, and it implemented those leadership and governance structures on that's how we grew the business, how we managed the business. Business development was something that none of us knew how to do. I remember when I was first starting out and I was struggling to get traction, my wife said, well, what did you do when sales guys would call you to want to sell you something? I said, well, I ignored them. That's what was happening to me. They were just getting ignored, right? So
good job, Darren.
So I the lesson of grit and tenacity and not giving up was really at the forefront of our early formation of how we went about getting business. And we were a brand new company. Well, we were all very, very experienced, but a brand new entity. And so we had no idea how to do sales. We had no idea how to invoice. We didn't have an accounting system. We didn't have any operational system. had no HR. I mean, it had nothing, right? It was just, we have a bunch of talented, retired pharmaceutical engineers and scientists, and there's value there. We just had to figure out how to go tap into it. So.
Yeah.
So when you kicked off, did you expect that a lot of your revenue would be outsourcing back to Lilly, or did you specifically
No,
plan to go elsewhere?
We specifically went elsewhere because there was kind of a wall of separation that Lilly had in their HR system, and so the vast majority of our work early on was not Eli Lilly. In fact, almost zero of it was, and so we had to learn to go expand our network outside of it. About the same time, one of the fortunate things that happened to us, about the same time as Elanco was separating from Eli Lilly, and so that helped us because Elanco didn't have the same rule set and restrictions. Now, it's since then, even though Lilly's still got a little bit of a firewall there, a lot of our colleagues are working on Lilly projects because the demand is so great. But that's how we started, and we got our first project was in Greenville, North Carolina, at a manufacturing company down there, and so we sent a guy down there for 6 months, and then the next thing happened, and the next thing happened. So
today, number of customers is roughly how many?
Oh, number of customers, there's probably 30 or 40 different customer bases that we have throughout the United States. We have work all over the United States, from Maine to Seattle, Bend, Oregon. So we've worked all over the United States, in Kansas City. So a lot of different places we've worked.
And the work you guys provide, is it mostly consulting? Are you selling any product along with it, or
we do not have any product. I think the best analogy for a couple insurance guys is the consultant side of your business, from how do you help a business like mine manage through the complexity of whether it be the health insurance or the commercial insurance. So there's that consultative side of business, but what we primarily do is we provide engineers and scientists and some affiliated folks to go in and help solve problems. And that problem could be because they don't have enough capacity to get all of their work done. It could be a capability problem. They don't have the expertise, so they're going to rely on us from some of our very senior level folks that have deep technical expertise. And so we framed our work around capacity and capability, and knowing that a company's challenges are generally rooted in one of those two categories. And so when it's not just Lilly that's spending a lot of capital, but when you start spending that much money, you become very capacity constrained from a human capital perspective. And so we're able to supplement the owners in what they do. So we don't have a product, but we do have a design wing of our business that is more traditional architect engineering, where we're actually, the product is the design.
Right.
So it's kind of like with you don't sell you're selling lines of risk management, right? We're selling technical capabilities and technical capacity.
Now, I would think in your work, a seniored, experienced individual would have a clear path within your organization. Do you have a path for early career talent?
Yeah, so as our business has matured, several things have happened. One is we've grown in numbers. We've had to recognize that in order for us to meet the market needs, we had to grow in leadership. And so 2 years ago, we started an employee or an emerging leader development series. And the first group that went through was 10 younger folks. So I'm going to call them all 30 years plus or minus. So it was folks from 28 to 34. So it's the 30-year-old mark that we look at, folks that have demonstrated aptitude and interest in moving into leadership types of positions. So we've developed that program. We're now on our second year, and it's a year-long program of emerging leader talent development that really looks at both business acumen and leadership capabilities and talents. And so we work on both of those, and then we give them a special project for a problem that's inside the company. Help us solve this. And so, as an example, one of them is our onboarding process was okay, but not great. And so their job is to take it from okay to great, and to create that experience for the first 3 months of someone's work with us. So we've been very intentional, Todd, about knowing that our business livelihood depends on, because of the scale that we are now at, depends on developing future leaders. Most of our senior level guys don't want anything to do with any of that. They just want to be
do the
give me
work.
the technical problem and get out of my way. I've done all that in my career. I just want to be an engineer. I just want to be a scientist. Let me go do that. Don't want to mess with the other stuff. So, and realizing that, you can't build a sustainable business on the backs of a bunch of 60-year-old guys.
Nope,
So how do you pivot? And so we've been learning that over the past 8 years of growing and changing, and our service offerings have changed because of that over the years. Of now, all of a sudden, we've got 25-year-olds out in the field doing stuff for clients, and what does that look like? It's very different than sending a 60-year-old.
Yeah.
And
what a great opportunity you're giving those young individuals to be so close, working with you guys that have been in so many different settings. I would think your 30-year-old self would have jumped at the opportunity to be in that kind of role.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Say Megan. Megan is now approaching 28, 30 years old, and she started with us right out of college. So maybe she's 27. I don't know how old she is, but Megan has probably had 6 different meaningful experiences of working with us. Of here's this project, and she goes and learns and conquers it, and then here's another project that you're going to go do, and it had nothing to do with what you just did.
Wow.
Other than it's related to manufacturing.
Yep.
And so she's gotten this wide variety of experiences that have led to this point where now she's a very much a significant technical contributor on the design team, because she's had all that years of experience of being around manufacturing and seeing the issues around manufacturing. And so part of what we want to do is make sure that we, if we're taking someone right out of college, we've got some base level work that is, we call it manufacturing 101, that it's a little bit drudgery. It's certainly not sexy engineering and science stuff, but it is foundational to understanding how manufacturing works. And so they'll do that for a year or two, and then we'll rotate them into a more challenging project that they go work on and get another different type of experience. So I didn't have this kind of opportunity when I was that age. I felt like when I was 30 years old, I was still clueless. So
yeah, that's cool.
So, well, we talked about how with your scale, some of these types of opportunities have opened up inside of your business. Give a little bit of context to our listeners about this. I mean, they could just Google Process Alliance and it's pretty much out there, but just if you wouldn't mind for our listeners, give them just kind of some context to just what the business has done over the last 8 years, and how the Lord has blessed your work and grown your business and that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, Ben's heard me comment on what I call rocket booster events. And so we've had these several moments in time and throughout our journey. The first one being I'll call it a chance meeting with a Lilly colleague who had a problem that he said, "Can you go solve this problem?" And so as a result of that, we end up getting an Eli Lilly vendor code, and that kind of opened the door for us to do business. And that was a couple years into to our journey. And then we had this freak moment in the history of the United States called a pandemic. And March of 2020 rolls around, and then we all know what happened there. But the thing about it is our government's response in Operation Warp Speed was, regardless of where you stand politically on the issue, the government's response in terms of enabling and assisting companies to get the vaccine out in the marketplace created this incredible demand for our type of talent. And so that really exploded and gave us visibility to many other companies. And at one point in time, we had worked in some way on the Pfizer vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the Moderna vaccine. We've worked for all of those different companies. And so it gave us broader exposure than we ever would have gotten without the pandemic. So as hard as it is to say and reconcile, but that was very good for our business. In any kind of crisis, there's winners and losers, and we just happened to be on the winning side of that. And then I made somewhere along that journey, maybe before that, I can't remember now, but I made a pivotal hire with a lady by the name of Michelle, and she just really exploded one part of our business and was so good at meeting clients' needs that word has spread. Now she's since retired, but word has spread that, hey, this company can do this, and it was really rooted in the work that Michelle did. And so that's kind of the second. There's these many rocket boosters. COVID was a big one, and then just quite frankly, the outcome of COVID was a significant reshoring effort to bring manufacturing back to the United States. So we benefited from that. The other thing that has happened is new modalities or new drug types have come on the marketplace that have driven the need for our talent. And so now what you see that didn't exist in my career and that has been, it is only 4 years old now, is this incredible amount of investment throughout the United States in pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. And so if you look at the landscape of what's happening across the United States, there's somewhere between $300 and $400 billion worth of new manufacturing facilities that are being built in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So you've got this incredible demand for talent. You've got a different curve of talent of folks that are going into engineering and science. And so it has just created this huge demand for the type of work that we do, such that 8 years ago it was me and a handful of retirees, with my wife doing everything in the back office, from invoicing to figure out what I do about insurance, how do I do all this stuff. So she managed that while we did all this technical stuff. And so she's really the one that built the infrastructure for our business, as well as built the culture for our business. So you have this from 2018 to today, where we've grown from, just Bonnie and I as full-time employees to a bunch of part-time engineers and scientists, maybe 10 of them, to now 170 people, because of those things that have happened from a demand perspective in the marketplace. So you have a pandemic, we have a critical hire, and then we have new modalities and new drug compounds that have come on that are creating. You couple that with the geopolitical forces of bring stuff back to the United States to manufacture, and now you have nearly $400 billion worth of new facilities going in the United States, starting from 3 or 4 years ago to not ending until 2030, 31.
And that number is pharmaceutical only, right?
Yes.
Right.
So it has nothing to do with data centers, has nothing to do with batteries. It has nothing to do with any of the other explosions that are happening in manufacturing.
Obviously Indiana's getting a piece of that. We got the Lilly stuff up in Lebanon. Mm-hmm. Where else across the country are those hot spots? What states are attracting that investment?
North Carolina is probably the leading one. New Jersey had always been a primary place.
Johnson & Johnson.
Johnson & Johnson, and that corridor up through New Jersey, there's a lot. We used to say you could sling a dead cat up there and hit a pharmaceutical plant.
Let's not try it.
Boston was really more science development. It wasn't manufacturing there, but it's not predominant. So it's really been North Carolina, New Jersey. Now it's expanding into Virginia, has a significant foothold in manufacturing.
Texas,
obviously it's expanding now into eastern Pennsylvania, which is really part of the New Jersey carryover into eastern Pennsylvania. Texas is now becoming a thing. Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought? You got space stuff that obviously Lilly's building a plant there. So there's a number of spots, but the primary ecosystems. North Carolina is the biggest. Indiana is certainly a major player. Out west is predominantly science heavy, not manufacturing heavy, but there's some. But those are the big regions as we look at is the Great Lakes region. And there's a smattering in Illinois and up into Wisconsin, some in Ohio.
What else is being built in Indiana that we may not be aware of? Certainly, you go up I-65 and you see the news on Lilly. What are the sort of not secret, but just not spoken about, and what companies are doing that and where they're doing it?
So, unless you're part of the ecosystem, you wouldn't know that Indianapolis has become the radio pharmaceutical hub of the United States.
What's that mean?
So there are drug compounds that are radioactive in nature.
Gotcha.
And Novartis came here. There were a couple of development firms that were developing drugs that had radioactive properties with them that are very oncology targeted focused. It's like it's like a heat-seeking missile where there's a cancer, and you find that, and it's like you target that molecule and you insert yourself in the molecule and you explode, and now all of a sudden you just put a really small dose of radioactive material to kill that cancer cell. That's as best I can understand it, right?
So is that driven not by Lilly, but by other players like Novartis?
Driven by other players. That's driven by other players, and the reason is because of Indianapolis has been the crossroads of the United States, and so you can by plane get to anywhere in the United States in a short amount of time, and so you see these radio pharmaceutical facilities popping up. There's so that's happening, and then the other space that's happened outside of Lilly has been the contract manufacturing space, and Fisher's has been a key player in the space,
like Incog
and Stefanato. You've got a major facility down in Bloomington, and so there's a larger bio and pharmaceutical footprint in Indiana than most people think, and it's pretty significant. That Indiana is the number one export of pharmaceutical drugs in the United States. So
Wow.
people don't know that. So
Is the contract manufacturing, are they making generic drugs, or are they being contracted by the still on patent owners to manufacture those drugs?
yes,
Both.
both.
Got it.
Primarily, it's they're still making the patent molecules. So what has happened, because demand has grown so high, and companies like Lilly and Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, they have a vast network of contract manufacturers because they just choosing not to build all of their own facilities, and they're leveraging folks like Incog and Catalent to, hey, make this stuff for me. They're mostly players in the the injectable space is
Right.
where the hot market is, but there are some smaller players in the orals, and there's only a few contract manufacturers playing in the what we call the bulk drug substance, or the actual making the chemical or biological molecule. There aren't as many players in that because it's so capital intensive, but we're working for a couple of those companies that don't have a presence in Indiana. They have a presence in other states, and so we've been working with them. So,
Is it possible that you are an economic development engine for the state simply by being located here? And what I mean by that is, are there customers that you're acquiring that have places elsewhere, and as you talk and as they talk with them, they go, oh, is that what's happening in Indiana? That's not what's happening here. And maybe those discussions turn into more of a, maybe we should put our next plant somewhere in Indiana.
I wouldn't go that far. Most of our customer bases are larger pharmaceutical players. So I don't think we've been that. I will say that we've been in conversations with I think it's called CIRTA, Central Indiana Regional Development Authority. We've been in multiple conversations with that group about if you look at to use the automotive analogy, you have your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers that support an automotive facility, and the same concept is happening in our space. And so we're that tier 2 supplier from a professional services perspective to pharmaceutical organizations. And so what CIRTA is really working on is how do we take the Indianapolis and the donut counties and create a broader regional hub associated with this. And they're doing a pretty good job. And so that's why you're seeing these investments in Lebanon and Fishers, and now we're starting to work on. So we've got this small little thing going on in Johnson County, and coupled with our other company that we've been in conversations with some of the leadership there about how do we broaden that tier 1, 2, 3 support network beyond or in the donut counties. And there's obviously Fishers gets a big lion's share of them, but there's opportunity. You're always going to have challenges when you get over concentrated in one particular location from a labor perspective, and so there's very limited work in our space going on in Johnson County. So it's kind of a ripe area in terms of especially if you're doing some kind of manufacturing, which is why we launched RippleWorks. To take advantage of that, as well as to have a very missional approach to that labor force. So there's a lot of activity going on in the biopharma ecosystem in Central Indiana.
Darren, you mentioned RippleWorks and that kind of your journey with Process Alliance. The concept of RippleWorks was laid on your heart. Can you kind of explain?
Yeah, so at its core, RippleWorks is a contract manufacturer in the really the medical device related space, And the genesis of that is, 3 years ago, I hired a guy who really understood the medical device world. I didn't know a thing about it. So he knows, he's a 30-year veteran of that space. And so I looked at that from a technical perspective and said, okay, we've got all this young talent from an engineering perspective. And so how do we couple this, as well as our senior leaders in Process Alliance all came out of manufacturing. So we understand manufacturing. And so we coupled that together, and we just kept saying, why not us? And then, quite frankly, one morning, I can't pinpoint it and say, I heard a voice from the Lord by any means, but, as I was having a quiet time, the concept of why not us? And then the concept of what was really laid on my heart is as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. And so I began to research and ask the question, who are today's least of these? And two things came to mind. Those that have been incarcerated and needed an opportunity, and those that are coming out of the cycle of poverty. And part of the inspiration for that, for me, was my dad, who broke the cycle of poverty, and some of his siblings did not. And I see the ongoing effects of being in poverty from, my cousins and their children that are my distant cousins to my kids that are still in that cycle. And so I just really asked the question, what can we do in terms of impacting the least of these? And knowing that who are they today? Who needs a helping hand, not necessarily a handout? And so RippleWorks was formed under that set of principles, and the name comes from really my wife kept talking about making ripple effects. You throw the stone in the pond, and you see that first ripple and then the second ripple, and then it became the analogy of, if we can change one guy's life, we've changed a family. If you change 5 guys and gals' lives, you begin to change a community. And so that ripple effect took root, if you will, and that's where the name Ripple comes from. So it's really a double metaphor. And the works piece was really generated around my perspective that work has dignity, and helping to restore dignity to some of these folks that have, are broken in whatever way, right? Either from born into poverty and not knowing how to get out, or making a poor decision when they were in high school that led to a substance abuse, whatever it is. Restoring dignity of work, and knowing that if of course I had the luxury of being in the insulin business, and I talked about that earlier, but if we take part of, say this is a medical device, and if we take part of making one part for that, and knowing and communicating that to our team that's working their way out of a tough situation, that what you're doing is impacting someone's life. That's part of that restoring the dignity of work. And that's where we're leveraging this double metaphor to come up with RippleWorks. And so, my wife really came up with the Ripple thing, and I started talking about the dignity of work. And that's how we formed the name to mean something. So really, RippleWorks is a purpose-driven manufacturing company that is focused on identifying and giving folks an opportunity to work their way out of poverty, to make better decisions, being around folks that are well grounded and have lived a good solid life and have made good decisions, and helping folks reframe, if you will. And so we're working through, what does that mean? We're probably about 3 months from hiring our first employee. And then the other part of it is, in our current business, we just can't, because we deploy folks to sites, and we have to do a criminal background check, and we can't deploy anybody to a client site that has any kind of criminal history. And so we're able to meet a different place in the marketplace and in the workforce that needs companies to come alongside, and that's what our mission is.
Yeah. another collaboration by Darren and Bonnie, the Ripple and Works. And you guys, I mean, you talked about, it's interesting in the name, you talk about the ripple and then the dignity of work, but that is almost a direct correlation to your partnership at Process Alliance with how your expertise is in manufacturing and your heart for people at Process Alliance. And I think that is very much part of your secret sauce. Can you give a little bit of insight to your approach towards your broader workforce? And I mean, there's probably several paths you can go down. I know humble, hungry, and smart has been a key formula for you, but what are some things that are really core to Process Alliance and caring well for your people?
Well, our fundamental belief is that we're training the next generation of pharmaceutical engineers and scientists. And so what does that look like? By giving them, unique experiences in pharmaceutical manufacturing, by having a leadership development perspective. So we've worked really hard on our culture, and again, I'll owe this credit this to Bonnie. The concept of pouring into one another. Again, there's scriptural principle there, right? 2 Timothy 2:2, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, can't remember. And the things you've heard me say in the presence of reliable men, teach to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others, right? So you take out the gender piece, but how do we train young engineers and young scientists? How do we pour into them? How do we make them better engineers and scientists? And so one of the things we do tell folks is that, look, the reality is you're not going to work for our company for 40 years. Maybe one of you, two of you might, but the reality is you're probably not. So when you leave, you're going to go with our blessing, but we want to make sure that we train you to the best of our abilities. And so that's that pouring into construct of not just from a technical perspective, but from a how do you work with people? How do you have hard conversations? How do you show up to work on time? Right? All of those things that the reality is I'm from a different generation, and I've had to learn to understand a different generation. But at the end of the day, we all have work that is meaningful to do. And so we've taken this perspective of pouring into one another very seriously, and that's really at the heart of our culture. And so that's where that all comes from, and it stems from, quite frankly, my wife's giftedness of being a servant, and of pouring into one another. And you see that in her work in raising our children, and her work at church, and everywhere else she's gone at 4-H, and so her mojo is pouring into people, and that's part of our DNA. It's a huge part of our DNA.
So you guys, obviously for 44 years have had the spouse title and relationship, but I guess now 9 years ago, you added the title of business partners.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what is it like to work with a spouse, or even if there's someone listening or watching this podcast and they work with their spouse, maybe share some of your experiences and thoughts around that topic.
Sure. Well, I'll come back to the analogy that Ben's heard many times, but somewhere along the line 3 or 4 years ago, I came up with an analogy of what's it like to work with your spouse, because I've had this question many times, right? So first of all, let me say that Bonnie and I are the complete opposite. So we've done Working Genius, and we've done some other things, and we are just complete opposite. And I'm thinking about 5 years from now, and she's thinking about the details of the today, and I can't see the details of today to save my life, right? And so we think very differently. We operate very differently. I was built to dream, and they call me the dreamer. And so I'm always dreaming of new stuff, and gets me in trouble because I get in front of our skis a bit too often and come up with a new business. And they said, well, what about this business that you launched that's not running very well, right? So we're the complete opposite. Gifted very, very differently from the Lord. And so how do you take those two that really are polar opposites from a gifting perspective and put them together and co-lead a company? So my analogy is this. If you haven't been to Williamsburg, Virginia, you need to go, and you need to see the stark beauty of the what they have restored to colonial days, during the Revolutionary War period, of how beautiful it was. And my analogy is they have these beautiful cobblestone streets, and they're absolutely beautiful, but they're really bumpy. And so running a business with your wife and growing a business with your wife is beautiful and bumpy. And so we both get to see the Lord's giftedness in each of us. And in revealing that giftedness, you see this stuff that is, I don't think like that, and I don't want to do it that way. And, it's probably, it certainly has been one of the hardest things that we've ever done together. You both have children, how raising children is beautiful and bumpy, right? And it's hard. And so this is really similar, but it's been a challenge. It's been, we've had beautiful moments. And so we're both at this point now recognizing that, we were blessed before, because the blessing that we've received from God is God himself. And that is our truest blessing. But for whatever reason, he has chosen to bless this particular business beyond our wildest comprehension. And Bonnie is fond of saying at some point in time, she says, remember, all we needed to do was to replace your income.
I was going to ask you about that.
All we needed to do is just replace your income. Well, God did that.
Then some.
And so what has happened now is that we're both in this. Now we've had to learn new stuff that we've never thought we would have to understand and learn about legacy, about generosity. We both came from a faithful steward perspective, and how does that really apply inside your business? And that's one of our core values of faithful stewardship. And we talk about, in Moses, what's in your hand, Moses? I got a stick. And I can't talk very well either. I got your brother Aaron, right? And so Moses, God gave Moses all the tools he needed to succeed to fulfill God's mission of delivering the Hebrews out of Egypt. And in the same way, he's called us to be faithful stewards of the gifts he's given us. And he just happens to have given Bonnie this gift and me this gift, and they at times collide and at times they mesh. And so we're really learning on through the conflict how to mesh to create something even better and leverage the talent that God gave each of us for his glory, for his benefit, and for the benefit of others. And so going back to faithful stewardship, use your gifts as you've been given to benefit others. And that's really the key message we give to our colleagues. So I tell that story at every employee orientation. Use the gift you've been given. Our framework that comes from God. You have your framework or where you believe your gifting comes from. But ours is this framework. And so we're able to share one of the first godly principles, as we talk about in our business with all of our colleagues about where we believe that gifting comes from. And so it's a beautiful cobblestone street, and
it's bumpy.
It's beautiful and bumpy. And
what have you learned though? You mentioned collide and mesh, or you can do the other opposites of the beautiful and bumpy. What have you learned in navigating that? Like, what are some things you're like, man, if I could rewind the clock and tell myself 9 years ago this is what Darren needed to know.
Yeah, I think that probably the one thing I really learned is I've learned to place more value in her perspective in a business that technically she doesn't know really anything about. And so, for example, the empathy isn't one of my stronger suits, right? But it is for Bonnie.
Yeah.
And so the whole culture that we have of caring for one another and pouring into one another, and my perspective is, well, they're not cut them loose, right? And she said, well, wait a minute. God's called us to minister to people, and we minister to people with their flaws, right? And so I think I've really learned to lean into her wisdom more. I think I originally had this is my space, right? This is engineering and pharmaceutical stuff, and so I think I really learned more about empathy and leaning into people and understanding people that I ever really have, and I really attribute that to her. That she's, we never worked together. We raised a family together, but you don't work together. I'm gone for 10 hours a day, and I come home and you manage through life, and then you go to bed, and then you rinse and repeat. And then the weekends are filled with, all right, kids got to go here, here, and here, right? And so I was always on the tailing end of that. All right, I need you to do this, this, and this, right? And so this really taught me how to lean into her giftedness more than I ever dreamed I would. And so that's been the beautiful thing about it, is I've changed because I see God's giftedness in her, applying in a space that I naively and arrogantly thought was my space.
Yeah. An engineering organization with leading in empathy, there has to be some sort of outside influence.
Yeah.
Right?
It's oil and water, right? It's oil and water. It just doesn't go hand in hand.
You can mix them, but they'll separate.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
That is good. Well, and then that kind of goes into the next thing I wanted to talk about. You guys have been married for 44 years, and in our peer group, you are famously known for telling and reminding and encouraging and imploring all of us to pursue our wives, or if they're a female listening to this, pursue, maybe wanting that from your husband is to, for husbands to pursue their wives. Yeah. Can you talk about, you clearly have a passion not only for your own marriage, but to encourage other men in their marriages. What's that been like over your lifetime? So I think you and Bonnie have invested in a lot of people's marriages and helping them and that sort of thing. So could you kind of explain kind of your journey on that?
Yeah, I think I learned that it's not original with me. I learned it many years ago, and I wish I could remember who taught me that. But it's that it's about the same time I learned that some people think that marriage is a 50-50 proposition, or maybe it's a 100-100 proposition, but it's really 100-0, and it really stems from the fact that God pursued me. The principle of he left the 99 to go pursue the one, so he pursued me. And so what do I learn from his example of his pursuit of me is in how I exemplify and reflect God's design and image of pursuing my wife. As God pursued me as God pursued the church. And so I see that as a reflection of who God is in terms of pursuing the bride. And so with Christ as the bridegroom, he pursues the church. And his analogy of us as husbands and wives, and our calling is to pursue our wife, to protect, to preserve, to uphold, to cherish, all of those attributes that I just wasn't very gifted at. And so over time, over that 44 years, I've learning from others and learned from hard mistakes of what does pursuing my wife really look like. And so that's why I use that phrase all the time. It's remember, you need to pursue the desires that she has are different than the desires that we as men have. And recognizing that what she longs for as a wife is different than what I long for as a husband. And so leaning into that of comfort and protection and security and intimacy from not a physical perspective, but from a relational intimacy perspective. That, again, I don't have a whole lot of empathy, and I also didn't get a whole lot of cards in this whole relational intimacy thing. So leaning into that, what does it mean? And it's that simple thing of holding her hand and bringing her flowers when I remember to do that. I haven't. Thanks for reminding me. I haven't done it in a while. Of holding the door open for her, right? It's out of that desire to draw closer from a relational intimacy perspective. And that's, to me, what pursuing my wife is. I failed a whole lot in that category, but I think one of the things that God's laid on my heart is to remind the men that I'm around to pursue their wives and to model that as best I possibly can, and to cherish, honor their wives. And then there's the whole practical thing that most marriages fail because conceit and a lack of humility and personal desire gets in the way of fulfilling your obligation and your desire to make the other person whole. And that's part of it. And how do I make my wife whole? How do I help her become to become the person that Jesus wants her to be? And that's my calling. And fail a lot at it, gentlemen. But that is what I believe as husbands we're called to do. How do you pursue your wife to make her whole in the eyes of Jesus, and to fulfill her greatest giftedness that God has laid out for them? So that's pursuing.
Darren, what does she say about her newfound role in the company?
She interesting. I mean, she takes ownership really, really seriously, sometimes much more than me. And she watches things much more closely. I don't want to say like a hawk. That's not fair representation of her, but she watches things more closely than I do because that's her giftedness. And so she's embraced that. And so we've got Process Alliance, Rippleworks. We're in the process of buying real estate. So we're establishing a real estate company. We're in the process of developing another company that really is her driving passion. And so I think the economic engine that Process Alliance has afforded us is to go start these other businesses, to minister to other folks, and to make an impact in our community in other ways. And so she's really leaning into that and this other project that I can't share yet. I look forward to sharing it soon, but she's really leaning into that. And I think had we not gone through this journey of hard knocks and as well as being blessed financially that has enabled us to go pursue this other opportunity that she's really leaning into. So she's learned a lot about business, and again, the operational piece and the cultural DNA is all her. And so she's leveraging that to go launch this other entity that, and she's, preparing some folks in our organization to go help lead this other endeavor. And so she's really that mindset of going into.
Is it possible she gained a bit of even more self-confidence in having some wins at Process Alliance that has given her kind of this confidence and gumption to go start this new venture? I sort of asked that in the sense of, we start this from a business perspective to replace your job income, your job income.
Yeah.
But yet along the way, you both learn a lot of things about business and formation and capital and all these things that maybe you didn't have as much when you were W-2 employees.
Oh.
And then on the backside of it, you create this passion project that you look back and go, I wonder if the Lord had us start Process Alliance, for all the great things that we did in that, but it was for this.
That's entirely possible. I think she has looked at this as an opportunity to make an impact in a different way than what we're making today with Process Alliance and even RippleWorks. And so I think it's, she's always been, fairly confident, and she grew up, pretty poor in a close-knit family that was pretty poor. And so, her DNA is work. And when we're done with work or jobs, we go home and we work. And that's in her DNA, right?
I love it.
And that's who she is. And so, you can see her out in the garden. She's just sweating and she's dirty. And so I've got her shirt that says dirt girl, right? So she works.
Yeah.
And so what I do think is that it has given her a better understanding of certainly business principles, and a better understanding of risk, and that it's okay for some risk.
Yeah.
To launch out into this new thing that will require quite a bit of capital. So certainly we've been blessed financially to go do this other thing, but it still requires a lot of capital to get this thing off the ground. And so I think the learning certainly has helped. Have we even dreamed of doing this new thing without going through this journey? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
We would have looked at it as that is way outside of our financial comfort zone, way outside of our talent, and I think what we've really learned is that our talent can be leveraged in many other ways beyond being a pharmaceutical engineering company. So that, I think, has been the one of the key learnings, is that we're able to see what we've been gifted with and are called to steward bigger than what we would have before.
I like it.
Giftedness and steward. Story of Process Alliance, and really probably two words that are really key to your guys' success along the way. Darren, thanks for sharing that story. We're getting to the end of our time, but we always ask our guests two questions that we wanted to ask you. And I'll go ahead and ask the first one is, what is a risk that you have taken that has changed your life?
The biggest risk I took was leaving a comfortable corporate job. Even though there was some financial incentive to walk away, and it balanced out that risk for a period of time. I think the training and the learning that I had from my parents and her parents, which was go get a good job at a great company, and when you get to be in your 60s, you retire. And I think that biggest risk of leaping out on faith and trying to build something from scratch, had no idea it would turn into this. I mean, zero idea. Again, I just need to replace my Lilly income, right? And so that risk has leveraged into these other unique opportunities to minister to people. And, you know, we just bought a brand new piece of equipment for RippleWorks, and, you know, we didn't sweat it. We didn't bat an eye, right? I mean, it was a very expensive piece of equipment.
Wow.
Okay, yeah, we can write that check, and then we can go hire folks that need another chance and give them an opportunity to thrive and to flourish. So the biggest risk was I left a very comfortable place.
Yeah.
Very comfortable.
You could have done what everyone else says they want to do and just retire.
I could have, and I can today, and I don't sense that's God's calling in my life. And,
No.
hey, retirement's not biblical, by the way, but
I was gonna say that might be a podcast for another day, right?
another day. Yeah. Second question.
So second question, and since you've sort of already replaced your Lilly income, what other than that is left yet unresolved, unfinished, that you have the resolve to complete?
Wow, that is a question I've never pondered, Ben, Todd. Well, what's going through my mind is what is unresolved and incomplete. I think is, I'll just say it's the continuation of using, it's going to go back to that stewardship thing and giftedness, using the stick that God gave me as he gave to Moses to further his kingdom in whatever way he leads me to. And so I think the thing that's unresolved for me in this new phase of our life that is very, very different than 10 years ago is understanding wealth from the perspective of being a steward of that wealth and how to manage it. There are things that I've had to go learn that I never thought I would be in a position to have to go learn. And so now I have to go learn these things. And one of the things that I'm really learning, and I think this really gets to your question, is that Bonnie and I are really learning is what does our generosity plan look like? And how do we understand that, hone into it, and believe in and focus on that, as opposed to, you know, this kind of the shotgun approach, and, you know, here's a need and we can go solve it. Well, I think that's part of it. We can respond aggressively when there's a need that we couldn't have before. And so I think the unresolved piece for me is, how do you want me to steward this next phase of our life, and what does generational stewarding look like, and what does kingdom impact really look like from what we're able to do by building businesses and impact and pouring into people, as well as what we're able to do with the excess capital that we've been entrusted with. That's what's unresolved for me, is understanding how to manage through that. I'd like to say it's easier, but everybody I've ever talked to said it's a lot harder than you think. And I found that to be true. There's so much need. Mm-hmm. And how do you steward that? How are you sensitive to the Spirit's promptings and knowing where to partner and invest and where to give? So that's unresolved for me, Todd. That's a learning. I'm on a steep learning curve. So
I'm sure as an engineer, that's a very difficult one to get right.
Yes, it is. The challenge is there's no definition of right. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But not for an engineer.
Not for engineers, that's
I
right.
need to balance the equation, but
There's a solution that I should come up with. And
I think your solution is just give the job to your wife. Let her solve it.
There's some of that, but we're partners in this, and we recognize that we've been handed. We've been gifted. We've been blessed to steward something that is beyond our wildest understanding and dreams.
Yeah.
And so we want to be very mindful of how to do that follow scriptural principles, that is sensitive to the Spirit's promptings, and so that's that part of that steep learning curve is doing that. What does it mean when Proverbs say a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, right? So as I lean into that, and I lean into the generosity piece of what I'm called to give, and so it's how do you put that together, and that's unresolved. I'm leaning into that, walking in that, growing in that. Both Bonnie and I are, and it's been an incredible journey. So.
Well, I look forward to being educated on what you learn as you sort through that, for sure. Thanks for joining us and sharing your story. We're just so blessed to be able to walk through life together, and with you and your business and your family, really. But yeah.
Thanks for reaching out and let me be part of your Risk and Resolve podcast, and so for the men in your audience, I'll leave this parting words: gentlemen, go pursue your wife. So.
There we go. Can't leave it any better. So thanks to our listeners for joining us for this episode of Risk and Resolve. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks for tuning in to Risk and Resolve. See you next time.